Your four favorites are Life is Beautiful, Spirited Away, The Red Shoes, and Meru. It seems like you're drawn to stories about imagination or obsession. The first two movies in your favorites involve characters using their imagination to cope and survive. The other two are about people who are consumed by an activity they're obsessed with, whether it's dancing or climbing, and they're willing to risk everything for it. The Diving Bell and the Butterfly is based on a true story, and like one of the men in Meru, it's about someone who suffers a stroke and experiences a form of paralysis. Like Life is Beautiful, it's about someone using their imagination to cope with tragic circumstances. Like Spirited Away, it's kind of symbolic in the way the protagonist is exploring this fantasy world that they've imagined. And like The Red Shoes, it's about someone who's dedicated to their art, except in this film the protagonist is a writer instead of a dancer. Wings of Desire, like Life is Beautiful, is a meditation on humanity, love, and finding beauty in life despite living in a world that's full of conflict, hate, and tragedy. Like Spirited Away, it's a fantasy that depicts a spiritual, almost otherworldly journey. Like The Red Shoes, there's an element of performance to it because one of the characters is an actor and another is a trapeze artist. And like Meru, it's about choosing to live and experience all that life has to offer, including embracing pain, struggles, and mortality. And if you watch this movie and end up enjoying it, then I also think you might like A Matter of Life and Death, which is from the directors of The Red Shoes. The Tree of Life is about a father-son relationship like Life is Beautiful, but it's also a coming-of-age film with spiritual themes like Spirited Away. It's visually stunning like The Red Shoes, and like Meru, it has some beautiful shots of nature. And Brad Pitt said his character in this film represents nature, but nature as that oppressive force that will choke another plant for its own survival. So I feel like it has some similar themes involving nature and survival if you really think about it. Dick Johnson is Dead is a documentary like Meru, but involves a family using humor and imagination to cope with death and tragedy like Life is Beautiful. Big Fish, like Life is Beautiful, is about a father-son relationship where the father tells the son tall tales or stories that sound like a fairy tale, and it's a fantasy like Spirited Away. I didn't want to just recommend a bunch of movies that involve or reference the Holocaust just because you have Life is Beautiful in your four favorites. And you already saw most of the ones I was thinking of anyway, but just in case, the ones I wrote down that you didn't have marked as watched that I think you might like are The Great Dictator, A Real Pain, Everything is Illuminated, and Phoenix. The relationship between father and son in Life is Beautiful kind of reminds me of Bicycle Thieves, but the tone of that movie isn't that similar. So I also want to recommend Goodbye Lenin, which, like Life is Beautiful, blends comedy and tragedy and revolves around a character intentionally deceiving a loved one in order to protect them. Turning Red, like Spirited Away, is an animated coming-of-age film where some characters transform into animals, and the film itself explores themes about identity, family, and self-acceptance. The same could also be said about Wolfwalkers. Since you like The Red Shoes, you might enjoy Black Swan, which is also about a dancer's obsession with her craft. All That Jazz also involves dancing and obsession, but it also has a bit of a spiritual fantasy element to it like Spirited Away. I think you should check out Fearless because like Meru, it depicts how people react differently to near-death experiences, and it explores themes tied to survival and survivor's guilt. The Rider, like Meru, is about human resilience after enduring physical trauma, and both films are about real people who push themselves beyond their physical limits in a way that can be perceived as inspiring for their perseverance, but also frustrating for their stubbornness and refusal to quit despite warnings from doctors and loved ones. And even though it's not a documentary, it's based on a true story with a lot of the actors playing fictionalized versions of themselves. Into the Wild is also based on a true story and is about man's connection with nature and enduring extreme conditions. You also might like Wild for similar reasons. Society of the Snow is also based on a true story, and like Meru, it depicts people working together to survive in extreme environments, and both films explore how far people can push themselves beyond their limits. But a few documentaries about risk takers that I think you'd enjoy since you like Meru are Man on Wire, Fire of Love, Grizzly Man, and Senna.